الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to the second day of Aqsa week, a week of events dedicated to raising awareness about Masjid Al-Aqsa. My name is Mariam Al-Khatib, coming through from Minnesota, United States, and the host of today's session. Today's session is titled Aqsa and Jerusalem, the Judaization project. And before we bring our speakers on, I just want to give a little bit of context on why this issue matters. Since it illegally occupied Jerusalem in the 1967 war, Israel has gone to great lengths to destroy any vestiges of faiths, history, and Judaize the holy city of Jerusalem. In addition to changing street and other signage to Hebrew and English, erasing the Arabic language, demolishing mosques and churches, Israeli authorities are intent on transferring the indigenous Palestinian population out of Jerusalem. Israel also continues to expand illegal settlements in what is known as East Jerusalem, in many cases building Jewish-only apartment buildings in neighborhoods that are predominantly Palestinian. The Jerusalem municipality has been issuing demolition orders to tons of Palestinian residents in East Jerusalem on the pretext that the homes were built without the required zoning and construction permits. And we've seen several cases of this just in the past days and weeks. The problem is that Israel almost always denies Palestinian construction permit requests, forcing them to build without official approval. Demolishing homes and expelling Palestinians in Jerusalem are not only tactics Israel is employing to change the face of Jerusalem. Since 1967, authorities, under the auspices of the Israel Antiquities Authority, have been digging tunnels under Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, causing structural cracks and weaknesses. Israel claims the tunnels are part of needed archaeological studies, while the unstated purpose is to destroy Al-Aqsa and all Muslim claims to that holy site in order to build the third temple. To provide more context on this, I'm going to invite our first speaker, Sara Alawaisi. Sara is the secretary for the Academy for Islamic Jerusalem Studies. She has a master's in Islamic Jerusalem Studies from the University of Aberdeen and a master's in education. Welcome, Sara, and the stage is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair, Mariam. It's an absolute honor to be with you all during Aqsa Week, to build awareness and to talk about a place that, unlike any other in the world, a place that is part of our own faith and our own aqidah, and a place that really mirrors the strength or the weakness of the Ummah. So today, inshallah, I will be talking about the Judaization of Al-Aqsa Mosque in particular. This is not a recent issue. This is not something that has just been going on for the past 10, 20 years or even 1948. In fact, it goes back, in 1929, at the time of Al-Buraq uprising, Zionists have always been trying to control or try to kind of have control over Al-Aqsa Mosque. And there was a dispute over what we call the Western Wall, as claimed by the Israelis that this is part of a temple of the Jewish temple, and at that time, after the uprising, of course, an international commission was appointed to investigate this issue, and it concluded that the Western Wall is part of Al-Aqsa Mosque and it belongs solely to the Muslims. So of course, if you've seen pictures of Al-Aqsa Mosque, you would know that this is part of the Western Wall, and it's part of the walls of Al-Aqsa Mosque itself. So an integral part of this mosque. And of course, later on comes, 1948 and 1967, control of the city. We need to be aware that ultimately the Judaization of Al-Aqsa Mosque or the city, the ultimate aim really is the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is really their aim, to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque and to build a Jewish temple on its place. So they have taken many measures to ensure that this will happen. It's many kind of long-term measures. They have worked it out, as part of a strategic plan. One of the other ways as well, so when the city itself was occupied in 1967, We have the Moroccan Quarter, which is also just kind of adjacent to Al-Aqsa Mosque. That was completely demolished, completely put to the ground. A place that housed Islamic monuments and was home to over 650 people, that was completely destroyed. I mean, and the aim of that is to completely erase that Islamic identity of Al-Aqsa and of the old city and everything around it. And of course, attempts don't stop there. So there was also an attempt in 1969 to burn the mosque itself. And some of you may have seen the footage of, the fire in one of these mosques within Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Jami' Al-Aqsa or Al-Jami' Al-Qibli. And there is a very famous minbar, the minbar of Salah ad-Din, that was completely burnt. This minbar that was commissioned by Nuruddin Zinki and was kind of a symbol of liberation, that was completely burned. So there has been many effort on the Israelis, on the Zionist behalf, to completely Judaize Al-Aqsa Mosque. The tunnels that Sister Mariam has just spoken about, the tunnels underneath Al-Aqsa and the Olden City, to the extent that there are buildings that are kind of on the verge of collapse because of these tunnels. Israel has allowed and is still allowing Israeli settlers, extremists, to enter Al-Aqsa Mosque on a continuous basis. So it started as something, as numbers that you can kind of count. And now, I mean, in this year, in 2020, the number reached just less than 20,000 settlers. Imagine, this is a holy mosque. I want you to remember that this is a holy mosque. And if you imagine armies, police officers, settlers coming in, and at the beginning it would just be from door to door, but now, the settlers come in and they actually perform rituals and prayers within Al-Aqsa Mosque. And of course, they are backed by the Israeli government. They are protected by also the Israeli government. And really, this is kind of escalating at a really dangerous rate. I mean, the plan is to divide Al-Aqsa so that there are places within. When we talk about Al-Aqsa, we're talking about 35 acres, a huge piece of land, and they want to divide it so that there are parts that the Jews and Israelis can come in and perform their prayer. And parts that they will leave to the Muslims. So this idea that this mosque would be divided in terms of its space and time, and this is, I mean, it really sounds crazy. It sounds absolutely something that shouldn't be happening. And I think it's, if you think of any mosque, this is not any mosque. This is one of the holiest mosques in our faith, and yet we turn a blind eye to all these escalations that are taking place. Israel tried also to impose electronic doors on Al-Aqsa, and there was a huge uproar at that time. And subhanAllah, I think there's something we kind of need to raise, which is, all these escalations have been studied very, very well by the Israelis. When to kind of introduce these things, when to put them in place. The only thing really that delays all these escalations are, the ribat and the jihad of the people in Jerusalem, the people in this city, who are constantly under a struggle, whether, being banned even from entering Al-Aqsa, imprisonment, all this, and they still are at the forefront of that kind of resistance. So it's important to kind of realize what is going on. And recently, of course, with this deal of the century, Trump's deal of the century, what is planned for Al-Aqsa is very, very dangerous. If we thought Al-Aqsa Mosque was in danger 20 years ago, we are on a brink of a catastrophe right now. The plan really is to give Israel complete sole and full sovereignty over Al-Aqsa Mosque. So at the moment we have the Jordanian custodianship, which part of the plan, it will either be restrained or completely ended. This reshaping and restructuring of the region including the Arab states. And this is another catastrophe that is happening, the whole normalization of, relations with Israel. And it affects everything in Al-Aqsa. Every single thing that happens at Al-Aqsa is because of the state that, on a wider basis that is going on. Very dark times ahead, with these Arab states supporting Israel. Now, all of a sudden, Israel is not the enemy. So this body that was implanted as a cancerous body, really, within the Arab region and the Muslim world, is now considered a friend and not an enemy. And you've probably recently seen different, heads of different states in the Arab world normalizing this. And it's really, really sad. And as I said, this is a very dark and dangerous moment in our current history. In 1948, we lost the land, and it feels like we are now living in this big intellectual catastrophe. We call it Nakba when the land of Palestine was lost, but now we live in this intellectual catastrophe where we don't even know what we're fighting for. Whether that is Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims worldwide, we're still talking about what is Al-Aqsa. We don't even know what is Al-Aqsa. The history. And our own approach to the conflict has been very much a measured one, and it's very much a reactionist one as well. And it fits in perfectly with the colonial agenda, that we get angry, we are angered by what's going on, and then after that we go back to how it was. And one of the things that we have been trying at the Academy for Islamic Jerusalem Studies to do is we have seen a huge gap within knowledge, within, this academic arena. And at the moment, the kind of knowledge and research that exists on Bayt al-Maqdis is very much Israeli and Zionist, that is there to fit in with a specific agenda to legitimize the state of Israel. And they have left almost nothing untouched within the history of Bayt al-Maqdis. And on the other hand, what we find, or what we have, is Muslim research, which is very much kind of emotional, and lacks methodology. It's not very academic, and on that arena, our work has been extremely limited, and we have really tried to fill in that gap by trying to fill in this gap. So in the last 27 years, we've been able, alhamdulillah, to produce experts of academic scholars on Bayt al-Maqdis who are more or less in different parts of the world, and establishing research centers for the study of, Bayt al-Maqdis, so that we are able to know what it is that we are fighting for. And I think, an issue like the Judaization of Al-Aqsa and, Bayt al-Maqdis is a very, very crucial one. And if we do not know what we are fighting for, I think we are leaving ourselves to a brink of yet a bigger catastrophe. Do we want to wait for the Al-Aqsa Mosque to be destroyed, or do we actually kind of come together, all of us, on different levels, different projects, and we come together and work on this? So I hope, inshallah, may Allah bless the work that you have done during this week. It's absolutely amazing to see everyone coming together, and actually, hopefully, things will build after this week and don't stop, and that, inshallah, we can all be part of this next liberation of Al-Aqsa and Bayt al-Maqdis, inshallah.
Ameen, ameen. Jazakallah khair, Sara. Thank you so much. And inshallah, we'll do some questions at the end. But let's go to our second speaker for today. I want to introduce Fayrouz Sharqawi. She's the Global Mobilization Coordinator at Grassroots Al-Quds, a Palestinian organization that contributes to the Palestinian long-term strategy for Jerusalem. Fayrouz will be talking to us about the Judaization more broadly in Jerusalem. So welcome, Fayrouz. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Shukran. Thank you. Thank you, Mariam. I am really glad to have this opportunity to speak here about the context, the wider context of Jerusalem, which builds perfectly after Sara's focus on Al-Aqsa. And I would like to start with one maybe comment before I start. I am speaking about the Judaization of Jerusalem, and we heard Sara talk about the Judaization of Al-Aqsa, but I think it's also important to emphasize that what we are speaking about here is a colonizer, the Zionist state as a colonizer, which is using religion as a tool for achieving political goals. So I would like our audience today to be aware of the fact that we are not talking about a religious conflict, so-called conflict between Muslims and Jews over one holy site or one holy city, but we are talking about a colonial project, the Zionist colonial project in Palestine in general, not only in Jerusalem, which is using religion and the portraying of the political context here as a religious context in order to achieve and fulfill political plans. So we are talking about a colonial project in Palestine, and this colonial project, just like any other settler colonial project in human history, is built on the notion of dispossession of the indigenous people, or ashab al-ard in Arabic. I mean, the term in Arabic is beautiful because the friends of the land means the owners of the land. And this is exactly the story of the Palestinians, us Palestinians living in Jerusalem, that are living a constant threat of being dispossessed and displaced from Jerusalem. So the case of Al-Aqsa Mosque is a symbol of the case of Jerusalem. And the danger that Sara was talking about is also imminent when it comes to the Palestinian presence and existence in Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, the Israeli occupation has very clear plans. These plans are and have been since the occupation of the eastern part in 1967, following the occupation and ethnic cleansing of the western part in 1948. But in 1967, clearly the plans showed that the occupation authorities want to, first of all, sever Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank, so cut the ties and isolate Jerusalem from its Palestinian continuity into the West Bank, and by doing so, at the same time, also displacing as many Palestinians as possible from the city. So since 1967, the Israeli plans for Jerusalem have been displacement and annexation. And immediately following the Naksa, the war in 1967, the Israeli occupation authorities started speaking about a so-called demographic balance they want to achieve and maintain in Jerusalem, a so-called demographic balance between Jews and non-Jews, their terminology. And this imbalance, if I may correct the term, is 70% Jewish, 30% non-Jewish. And in order to achieve this goal, the Israeli occupation authorities have been designing and implementing very strategic and long-term displacement policies against the Palestinians in the city. I'm going to go over them very quickly, very shortly, before continuing to comment on the topic. So first of all, the first tool of displacement that was created for the sake of displacing Palestinians from Jerusalem is the very legal status that they hold. An Israeli legal status that was imposed on the Palestinian residents in Jerusalem, which is misleadingly called a permanent residency. But this legal status actually considers the indigenous Palestinians in Jerusalem as immigrants to their own city. And by so, they have to continuously, legally prove that Jerusalem is their so-called center of life. This actually means that a Palestinian cannot freely choose to go live outside of Jerusalem without risking not being allowed to go back. So think about Palestinian young men and women who have dreams about studying abroad or living abroad or simply traveling for a long time. They cannot do it freely because being away for a year is already creating a threat for them to not be allowed back, because the Israeli occupation authorities claim that they have moved their so-called center of life from Jerusalem. By using this one tool, by the way, since 1967, the Israeli occupation authorities have displaced 15,000 Palestinian residents from Jerusalem, 15,000 Palestinians who lost their right to live in their own hometown. Following the legal status, the second tool, which is another tool that is common for colonizers everywhere is land policies, confiscating Palestinian lands, of course, uprooting the indigenous people, dispossessing the indigenous people, disempowering them by doing so. So, of course, Palestinian land is strategically confiscated. Again, these policies, many of them are the very same policies used in other areas in Palestine. We are speaking about Jerusalem, but this is true also for 48 occupied lands. This is true for West Bank lands that are being confiscated, stolen, robbed from their owners, and used for colonial projects. So also in Jerusalem, Palestinian land is systematically confiscated for the sake of building colonies, colonial roads that connect these colonies to each other, and also for industrial zones where the Israeli occupation uses Palestinian resources, human resources as well as natural resources, in order to build a very strong economy that by default is based on suffocating the Palestinian economy. So also suffocating the Palestinian economy is another tool of displacement. Building the wall, for example, isolating Jerusalem entirely from the West Bank, which also meant cutting off any movement of goods and customers in and out of Jerusalem. So this has led to a drastic rise in poverty rates and unemployment rates among Palestinians in Jerusalem, which is another very effective tool of displacement. In addition to land policies, there are also planning policies that include home demolition, as Mariam started speaking about them in the beginning. So demolishing Palestinian homes at the pretense that they were built without permits, but these are the same permits that the Israeli occupation authorities are preventing from the Palestinians, again, systematically rejecting Palestinian applications for building permits. 94% rejection rate. It is safe to say that the Israeli occupation authorities systematically, intentionally prevent these permits from the Palestinians, then using the lack of permit as a so-called legal excuse for demolishing the homes. We can go on for a long time speaking about displacement policies, but I would like to emphasize another thing, a very important thing here. Sometimes people would hear terms like land confiscation or home eviction or even home demolition for lack of permit, and they might assume that we are talking about a normal state that has the rule of law, that has just laws that people should not break, and that they are for the good and well-being for everyone. And that kind of prepares the ground for people listening to the stories to think, oh, but Palestinians shouldn't be breaking the law, no? And again, when the law itself is unjust, when the law itself is the colonizer's law, then it means that simply by existing or struggling to exist and live in freedom or dignity, you must be breaking the law somehow. So I think that here is one catch that is very important, especially from people from outside Palestine, to be aware of. We are speaking about also the use of legal systems that the Israeli colonizer state has created in order to support its political goals. So when speaking about Jerusalem, when speaking about Al-Aqsa, I mean, Sara was talking also about all of the settlers that go into Al-Aqsa, have rituals, they even are having wedding ceremonies now inside Al-Aqsa. There is a triangle in action here, a triangle made of the Israeli government, the Israeli occupation government and parliament that do the legislation of such unjust colonial rule and laws. And then we have the judicial system, the Israeli courts that are implementing these laws. So they are the ones signing the eviction letters. They are the ones signing confiscation orders and home demolition orders. And then the third part of this triangle is settler organizations, which have a very strong back from Zionist billionaires who pour a lot of money, because all of these actions, all of these settlement actions, it cost a lot of money, but then they have a lot of backup coming from Zionist and pro-Israeli millionaires and billionaires. So they have their human resources, they have the money to exhaust the Palestinians. So we are speaking about decades of this triangle in action, disempowering, dispossessing, and displacing Palestinians from Jerusalem. So it's a very strategic plan that is in place, that is working not always slowly, but certainly always steadily towards achieving its goals of having an all-Israeli or all-Jewish Jerusalem according to their plans. At the same time, there are very steadfast and resilient Palestinians in Jerusalem who, despite all of these policies and systematic oppression and actions of the colonizer, are still steadfast and resilient in Jerusalem. Maybe simply mentioning the uprising around Lions Gate, Bab al-Asbat, in 2017, when the Israeli occupation authorities wanted to impose new restrictions at the doors to Al-Aqsa, on entry of worshippers to Al-Aqsa, including metal detectors and new surveillance cameras. And then we witnessed a very inspiring moment of spontaneous uprising. There wasn't a lot of community organizing per se. There was, of course, on the small scale, inside neighborhoods, neighborhood committees did a very good job mobilizing. But we saw tens of thousands of people at Lions Gate during that summer, people who are not all Muslim and not all religious Muslim, but there were also people who are not Muslim or people who don't identify as Muslim or practice Islam, but everyone was there. And I think that was a moment that reminded us all that Al-Aqsa is indeed a holy site for the Muslims, but Al-Aqsa is also the symbol of Jerusalem. It is the symbol of our ownership and belonging to Al-Quds, to Jerusalem. And that is why everyone was there. And to even expand it a bit more, Al-Aqsa is a symbol of our belonging and our roots in Palestine. And it being under the imminent danger that Sara was talking about is another bell that is ringing and reminding everyone that this colonial system is continuously disempowering Palestinians in the hope that they will be exhausted and stop resisting. Palestinians haven't stopped resisting, but Palestinians also need support and they need help. One of the things that we do at Grassroots Al-Quds is, first of all, to research on Jerusalem, because we believe that the knowledge about the city, the knowledge about our history as Palestinians in this place, the knowledge about our struggles, history, is a tool that we can use. This knowledge is a tool, and information is a tool that we can use in our community organizing, mobilization, and in our struggle for liberation. At the same time, we also need the support from outside, because when we're speaking about such a complex and very expensive project like the Zionist project in Palestine, this project is not funded merely by those $3.8 billion that the US sends unconditionally every year to Israel, but also by Israel situating itself globally as a normal state that can have normal business with other countries, with other governments. And so we have governments dealing with the Israeli occupation government. We have corporations invested in the Zionist economy in Palestine, and they are empowering this system. They are empowering this colonial structure. And for people to make a difference, people need to pressure their decision makers and say, not with our taxpayer money, you don't support these atrocities that are taking place in Palestine. And people should pressure their own corporations and say, you cannot do business with the criminal corporations that are stealing, robbing land and other resources from the Palestinians, aside, of course, from the individual activism that people can do, which is to boycott Israel, to boycott Israeli products, to boycott Israeli cultural and academic institutions. Boycott is a very important tool that the Israeli Zionist lobby is now working very hard to criminalize around the world. And I think that is a perfect moment to remind everyone that it is a very effective tool that we should not give up on.
Thank you so much, Fayrouz, for that overview of the policies that Israel employs, and more importantly, giving us kind of a tool for us that we can use to help support Palestinians on the ground. And I hope we can touch back on this after in the Q&A. But first, let's invite our next speaker, our final speaker, Ilham Shami. Ilham is a Jerusalemite teacher, and she's going to be speaking to us about what is, everything that we've learned, talked about in terms of policies that Israel employs. What does that mean for the people on the ground? So welcome, Sister Ilham, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you, Sara and Fayrouz, for your introduction, which was really great and tackled that much important issues. Now, as for me, I'll be talking about my own personal experiences, either as a mother, as a teacher, as a Jerusalemite, or maybe even as a Muslim who needs to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque and pray there. So let's start with my childhood, if you wish. It started as an experience with my brother Ayman, who was martyred at Al-Aqsa Mosque. That was during the massacre of 1990. It started then, back then. Every day there were clashes with my family. There were tear gas, bombs, there were bullets, everything that a child could experience, which was really, really harmful for a child. It started then. I was at school, at what we call at college, if you wish. And then my experience started. Every now and then, I was summoned for investigation. Still youth, as I said. If I want to travel, for example, I would be stopped for at least 7 hours, detained. My children would be waiting. Why is our mother summoned? I was called for investigation 4 times for nothing, just for being a Jerusalemite who loves her Aqsa Mosque, who does her best to be there. So let's now talk about me as a teacher, for example. I will talk about it step by step. As a teacher, because I didn't study in Israeli universities, let's talk about the, if you wish, salaries. My salary, I have been a teacher for about 28 years. My salary is very, very low compared to the Israeli teachers, if you wish. So here with this low salary, I have to live with my family in a rented house, which I pay very high taxes for. I have no place to rent my car. I have no money, for example, to pay for the what is called the arnona, and arnona is the tax that is paid for living in your own house, and this is very, very high. For example, if my children needed to go to university, I have sometimes to postpone their semester because I can't pay for that. But on the other hand, if we're talking about the Israeli side, everything is there for them. If I'm talking about having the need to build a house, I can't build my own house because, first of all, I don't have money to buy a land. I don't have money to buy a house. If I'm lucky enough, then, for example, if I have a land, if I'm lucky enough, then I would need at least 500,000 shekels. And this is like, maybe 100,000, at least $100,000 to have the permit, just to have the permit to build. And after having that permit, maybe my house will be demolished before even I finish it because of nothing, but because of a very simple sentence. We haven't finished your procedures yet. But I do have the permit. Okay, the permit is something, and finishing the order is something else. So I have nothing. I can't have my own house. I can't have anything related to me to keep me stick to Jerusalem. If I want to go and pray, which is the idea of this panel today, you can't pray whenever you want or wherever you want in Al-Aqsa Mosque. For example, I think everyone knows about what has happened to Bab al-Rahma. There, you can't go and pray whenever you want. I can't enter my Aqsa Mosque whenever I want. And this is a very, very problematic thing. Maybe I will be detained if I said, no, I will enter. This will be more than enough to be put in prison. One day, the Israeli soldiers broke into my house. All my children were afraid. They told my husband, you and your children go inside a room. We're not here for you. We're here for Ilham. Okay, you're here for Ilham. What has Ilham done? Ilham has done nothing but posted a post on Facebook. So I was something like arrested and investigated for more than, at that time, for more than 12 successive hours. So this is being me as a teacher. Now let me talk about me as a teacher. As I said, a Jerusalemite who has been broken into her house, and as a wife. As a wife, my husband is a West Banker. A West Banker means he is not from Jerusalem. He lives in Bethlehem. So in our early marriage, my kids couldn't see him. They couldn't see him sometimes for months, and that was something problematic. I, as a mother who rented a house far away from her family, I had to take them to hospitals, even if late at night. I had to be their mother and their father. They didn't know their father because he couldn't have any permit to enter Jerusalem. And if he was able somehow to enter Jerusalem and he was seen by any soldier, he would be immediately apprehended. And that was a great problem. So a mother, sorry for the word, a mother with a husband, but no husband. Husband, she's married, but her husband is not with her. Her children needed a father. They did have a father, but he wasn't there for them in their crucial times. And that was a great problem. Now, if I wanted to issue ID numbers for my kids, for example, now my daughter, my eldest one is 23. She was 12 years old when she had something to prove that she is my daughter and her father's daughter. She couldn't have any issue paper, anything legal, nothing. Neither her nor her brother and sisters. They had nothing. So we had to suffer that much at that time. My daughter, my youngest daughter, she had an accident, a severe one. She got burned severely. And she and I. And the problem was that she didn't have anything to get to the hospital, to be hospitalized. Nothing again, but because Ilham is to them is an activist, so she can't be cured, she can't be hospitalized, she can be nothing. And that was, again, a great problem to us. Now, let me focus a little bit again on being a teacher. I'll be coming back to this point. I'm a teacher, but I have nothing to keep my rights. For example, as I said, we have here, for example, 2 syllabuses in Jerusalem, one that is related or affiliated with Israeli and one with the Palestinian syllabus or curricula. Because we're teaching the Palestinian in my school, we're teaching the Palestinian. This means now during the COVID, for example, COVID-19, you're not allowed to gather with your students in your school. But the ones who are studying, even Arabs, I'm talking about the Palestinians and the Arabs, the ones who are studying what is called as Begrut, which is the Israeli syllabus, they are allowed to go to their schools. My school is next to another one that teaches the Israeli syllabus. They can go, we cannot. So we're talking about very major problems that we're facing every day. Again, being nothing but being Palestinians. So in general, this is what we face. I have been detained for 4 times. The thing that got my kids very, very afraid. Now I have my youngest daughter. Every now and then, she wakes in the night, maybe having a very bad dream, shouting, "No, don't take her. No, don't take her." And this is a problem. Now my daughter is 18 years. She's still facing these I don't know how to call them, very, very horrifying dreams. And I think I will stop here unless you have any question for me, because this is something so much emotional. And thank you for having me with you today.
Thank you so much, Mariam, for sharing these difficult details of the reality that you live As a Jerusalemite, Sister Ilham is a symbol of the reality and also a symbol of resistance. But even then, continue to resist, but that doesn't erase the day-to-day challenges. And so, thank you so much for sharing that, because sometimes I think we applaud Palestinians and Jerusalemites for their resistance, for standing, for protecting Al-Aqsa, for protecting Palestine. But it's really important to understand that this comes at a cost, and it comes at a very, very high cost. And so thank you so much for shedding light on that. If we can get maybe all of our speakers on stage, and I just have a few questions, inshallah, to wrap up the session. First of all, again, thank you all for this really eye-opening session on the reality of the Judaization of Jerusalem, what that means from a policy perspective, what that means for Jerusalem, what that means for Masjid Al-Aqsa. Now, just a couple questions. I want to start off with a point that actually Fayrouz commented on, and I'm going to direct the question first to Sara, because Fayrouz, you made a really good comment about how sometimes this is framed as a religious conflict, and it's really important to understand that what is happening to Al-Aqsa is an extension of the settler colonial project. In our faith, even as Muslims, right? We believe what makes Jerusalem special is that it's holy for the three Abrahamic religion. And so how do we answer to the question of, Muslims worship in Al-Aqsa, so why can't Jews worship? Why don't they have claim to worship? So again, Fayrouz, I think, made a really good comment that we need to bring that conversation back to how this is a settler colonial project and an extension of that. But Sara, can you speak a little bit more to where that line is drawn between recognizing how Jerusalem is integral to the Jewish and Christian faith and the Muslim faith, but at the same time, saying that there are boundaries that are being crossed as part of the Zionist project?
Yep. So of course, like Sister Fayrouz was saying, that this project is a colonial project, and it is there to serve a purpose, and the general purpose is really this idea to weaken the Muslim Ummah, and subhanAllah, since the start of having this foreign body in this region, this foreign body being Israel in this region has been in absolute conflict since, and I think in our own faith, we we understand how important and how significant this Al-Aqsa Mosque, Bayt al-Maqdis, this region that is blessed and holy in our faith. But Allah tells us, of course, that this region is Allah has made it lil alameen, for everyone. This region is not specifically for Muslims. Of course, there are all faiths have their own connections with, especially the city. And I think it's wrong to assume that as Muslims, we would have this exclusive version of this city. We have seen in the past, back in history, how whether it is the time of Umar ibn Khattab, Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, the different sultans, Ottoman sultans, who have made this city an absolute open city to everyone to come and perform their rituals and their prayer. The issue with Al-Aqsa, we are talking about a complex, a mosque that is holy to Muslims. And the problem here is when you have the Israeli narrative of saying that this is where the temple was, even though that there is no archaeological or historical evidence to support this, and they're wanting to demolish this so that they can build their a Jewish temple. This is where the problem is. The things that Fayrouz and Ilham have said in terms of completely changing the identity of the city, making it an exclusive Zionist city. They want to get rid of people like Ilham, all the Jerusalemites. They will try to smother, Palestinians who are there at the forefront. And I think for us, it's very important to understand that, at the heart of all of this, of course, lies Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, and we should be aware. And this is where awareness and knowledge is so crucial, because if we don't know what it is that is going on, we don't really know what we're fighting for. I'm not sure if this really kind of answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I think I remember when the what is it called, the Deal of the Century came out. One of the things that caught my attention on the map that they produced is Muslims who come in peace will be allowed to enter Masjid Al-Aqsa. And I thought how ironic it was that the people who are deciding to divide up people's land are going to be the ones to define peace and who's allowed to come in and out. So thank you for that clarification, and thank you, Fayrouz, for making that comment. Fayrouz, I do want to go to you. I know towards the end you started talking about what people can do to help and support, and of course you talked about boycott, huge buzzword. I know even in my state, Minnesota, we have laws literally in Minnesota, thousands of miles away, that make it criminal. Like for me right now, because I publicly support BDS, the state of Minnesota cannot contract with me if I wanted to. So can you speak a little bit more to the importance of engaging in boycotts and these types of methods? And also, just trying to bring question, the other side always will say, Palestinians on the ground are being hurt by boycotts. There are Israeli companies that are employing Palestinian labor workers. You're hurting them. Actually, a Minnesota-based company, Pillsbury, is operating a factory in Atarot. And so one of the big talking points is like, well, you're going to, kick them out of a job. So can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes, thank you. I'll start with your last point because it's the most provocative answer ever. When you say you should not have your factory on stolen land and using stolen resources, then the answer would be, but aren't we providing jobs for Palestinians? Well, Palestinians prefer to have their own corporations, having their own factories, employing their own people. I mean, it's very narrow-minded or very narrow lens to look at this through. But so that's the answer to the point about the factories and employment. Israelis employ Palestinians, Israeli companies, Israeli factories, they employ Palestinians. Does that make it right? Does that make it right that they have their factories, that they, and again, what kind of conditions are given to these Palestinian workers? I mean, these Palestinian workers were the ones to be thrown away when COVID-19 broke out, and then there was a threat suddenly, and no one cared about them, and no one cared about their health and their safety. So I think that's a very ridiculous claim to give against our demand that these corporations do not cooperate with the occupation. But in general, speaking about boycott, I mean, the Israeli lobby, the Zionist lobby is doing a lot and spending a lot of money in order to influence legislation. I mean, the U.S. is one very clear case. You're in Minnesota, you said. There is also Texas and other. I mean, I can't remember now exactly which states, but there is already anti-BDS legislation taking place there, and slowly the Israeli attempt to connect and equalize between boycott and anti-Semitism is becoming more and more common. And I think that it's very dangerous and that we need to stop it, and that people need to stand their grounds and say, no, boycott is a very, very legitimate tool that individuals and groups can use. Because maybe I'll retreat for one step and speak about what is expected from us as Palestinians. I work at a Palestinian organization, and many donors want us to do the so-called advocacy, which means writing reports in perfect English, citing international law, and citing the Geneva Convention and other conventions, and going to their own parliamentarians and give them the big news. There is an occupation in Palestine and there are human rights violations in Palestine, and thinking that, that the mathematics of it, you tell them about this, they will apply diplomatic pressure on Israel and it will stop. This is a bluff. This is a joke, and we are wasting our effort and money, donor money that we are expected to be thankful for, on a work that does not bear any fruit. Because we should know by now that international law does not liberate people. International law does not protect human rights. What moves things in our world is money. Who's making money? Who's benefiting from what? Who's gaining from what structure? Who has the power to maintain it? And so what we need to do as people, not only Palestinians, but also people around the world who want to simply be ethical people on this planet, we should first of all realize our power, the power that we have in these practices, such as boycott, such as divestment, pressuring our own corporations to divest, our governments to divest, our pension funds to divest from the criminal system that is the state of Israel. And so we should realize our power and we should act by it. And this is true for all struggles for justice around the world. I mean, again, we should look at the Zionist project in Palestine not as merely the Zionization or occupation, colonization of Palestine. It is part of a bigger network of corporations, institutions that are gaining from this unjust reality that people are living around the world. And struggles for freedom, struggles for dignity for people should be connected. We should realize and acknowledge our power, and we should act by it.
Very well said. And, I always tell people, like, look how hard they're fighting BDS. Like, that's the only evidence you need that it's working. And campus, we pass resolutions that are completely non-binding, very symbolic. It's literally just the symbolic. And I mean, they would pour tons of resources and efforts into fighting it. And so it's a great tool and allows people like myself who are outside of Palestine, Jerusalem, whether you're Palestinian or not, whether you're Muslim or not, to be able to say, you know what, I want to be part of this movement, and I want to be able to make sure that none of my money is going to the oppressing of other people. And great point about the international law. I just finished Noor Ariqat's Justice for Some. I don't know if you've read it, but it basically talks about legal frameworks are set up and used as a way to oppress Palestinians and in other places. And so, what is considered legal in law doesn't make it ethical, doesn't make it right. Sister Ilham, can you tell us a little bit about, what is it that helps you as people, as Palestinians and Jerusalemites on the ground, other than BDS, right? Like, BDS is kind of a tool that folks are engaging in, but what gives you hope and what gives you kind of that feeling of solidarity in the face of such dire circumstances that you're facing day in and day out? You're on mute.
Okay. Now, first of all, let's go back to our model. Our model is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you go to your Quran, if you go to your model, then there is your strength. There you get it. And I have a belief, and this is what I'm teaching my kids. Whenever you are right, then you will be stopped. Whenever you're right, then you will be faced. Problems will come to your way. Every time you believe that you are right, somebody will be there for you, and maybe out of jealousy, maybe out of hatred, will try to stop you. So if I go back to to the story of my brother was 18 years when he was martyred. So he tried to be something. He tried to, for example, he studied all the doctrines of Fatah, of Hamas, of Jabha. And he said, no, this is what I want to be, regardless what it is. Okay. So he had a belief. He was still a graduate, Tawjihi graduate, a high schooler. When my mother said to my father, I want to send him abroad and that he will study there, I don't want him to be killed here. It was the first intifada in Jerusalem or in Palestine. So he said to my mother, the bullet I'm going to take in Iraq will be the same bullet I'll be taking it here. And it was less than 12 hours. And he had his bullet here, and he was the first martyr in Al-Aqsa massacre, or during the Al-Aqsa massacre. So I had this belief. He was right. So Allah took him to his side as a martyr. Tamam? Okay, so I have nothing illegal to do. This is my land. This is what I believe in. Who should take it from me? No one but me. Fine. Now, because of a post on Facebook, I was apprehended. My house was broken into. There's no reason for that. So this means that I am right. This is the least thing I get hope from. believing that sooner or later, and this is what is mentioned in Quran, sooner or later, Palestine will be mine. I need no more hope than this. So Allah is with us, and this is enough for me. And this is what I teach my children. Always be by the side of Allah, and you will win. Sooner or later, you will win. They tried many excavations, nothing. There was, as Sarah said, they tried archaeological things. They tried to put things to say this is our land. They come out with nothing. You know, everything for them is just a big lie. And I have my belief in Islam. This will be more than enough for me. This is what I teach my children. More importantly, if you wish as well, all the stories of the Palestinians, as Fayrouz said, not only Muslims defend Al-Aqsa Mosque. So during what happened in the last time or last period, there was a Christian youth. I think his name is Milad. I forgot his name. He was always there because he had ethics. He believed this is Jerusalem. It's not only for Muslims, or I have to be by their side. So if a Christian or if a non-Muslim believes in my rights, I should be the one who believes in his rights more than the others. This is what gives me hope. I hope that I did answer you.
Yes, thank you, thank you. You know, truth and justice is on our side, and 70 years later, and they still can't eliminate the Palestinians or the Palestinian story or the Palestinian situation, as Tony Blinken would like to put it. So I wish we had more time to talk. Inshallah, I make dua that we can all gather together in Masjid in Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. Drink some shai and talk more, because this is such a beautiful conversation, such a beautiful gathering. But I know I'm getting messages that the session is ending, and I have some important announcements to make. So I just do want to end with a final thanks. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much, all of you, for everything that you do for the cause of Palestine, for resisting in every way that you do, no matter where you are, whether you're in Jerusalem, whether you're outside of Jerusalem. And I encourage our audience to look into the different organizations that the sisters here mentioned, support their work, learn about it, knowledge power, and also make sure to keep everyone here in your du'as and your prayers, and may Allah reunite us all in Palestine. Thank you all. Just some announcement for tomorrow's sessions. We have Al-Aqsa, the first webinar of tomorrow, Al-Aqsa, Lands of the Prophets and Messengers, at 1 p.m. Eastern Time or 6 p.m. GMT. And then the second webinar, we have Al-Aqsa and Al-Quds are as integral to the foundation of Muslim identity, at 3 p.m. Eastern or 8 p.m. GMT. Again, Jazakumullah khair. Everyone take care, be safe. Assalamu alaikum.
Al-Aqsa, Al-Aqsa.